afternoon and welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. It's a stressful time for everyone, whether you're laid off or you're just cooped up and getting cabin fever during the self-isolation of this pandemic. Those with underlying health conditions, essential workers who have to venture to work, lots of stresses for everyone, to be sure. But consider being an expectant mom facing the prospect of giving birth during this pandemic. The Midwives Association of British Columbia told Richmond News that interest in home birthing has doubled in recent weeks. Midwives in the small city of Cochrane, Alberta, just outside of Calgary, told a newspaper there that they're inundated with pregnant women who are terrified at the thought of having a baby in the hospital, but also terrified of the thought of a home birth. So there's a lot of stress in every direction. We're going to talk to a midwife with the out of Nipissing, Ontario, about how the profession and expectant moms are traversing this weird time. And later in the show, there's no shortage of memes making fun of parents being trapped at home with children, the struggles of homeschooling, and all that can ensue when a family's cooped up for too long. But imagine the opposite. Imagine this pandemic meant that you can't see your child anymore. Well, that's the reality for many parents whose children are in the foster system. We'll talk to a couple of them, including a couple that's charged with kidnapping their children from a supervised visit. They say because they were scared to leave their children in a foster home during this pandemic. And we'll also talk to a longtime advocate of families who have been battling the child welfare system. He's a pediatrician turned politician who has spent 20 years fighting an uphill battle. He's got lots to say. You can, of course, call us. It's a phone-in show if you want to join in the conversation. But a reminder, though, that you can't say anything that could potentially identify a child that's in care. Our phone number is open. It's toll-free, and it's open now. 1-877-647-2786. Joining me now is Emma Carbonneau, who works as a midwife bringing new life to Earth in North Bay, Ontario. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. How are you?
Great. I need to preface this by saying we do actually have somebody in labor in our clinic right now. So
be quick.
If needed, I will have to run out.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, we will be quick. Let's try to keep it to 5 minutes then. So I want to know, how has this pandemic affected midwives from your perspective?
Well, I think initially there was so much extra work in terms of planning because we see our clients quite frequently, and we do long visits and we do lots of home visits. And with this pandemic business, it became, okay, we need to have a revised schedule of visits. So not seeing people as often as we normally would. So instead of seeing somebody every 4 weeks, you might see them every 6 weeks. And when we get to the 2-week visits, we're pushing them to 3 weeks. And so we had to sort of really look at everybody and plan out their care, so it sounds like, oh, less work because you're doing less visits, but there's actually so much planning and you're still doing phone visits in between. And so that was quite challenging.
We're hearing out of Alberta, some midwives there were saying we're just inundated with pregnant moms phoning going, I don't want to go to a hospital and have my baby. Are you guys getting that type of phone calls at your clinic too?
We are. We need to not spread ourselves too thin, though. So unfortunately, we are having to turn away a lot of people. If they're not already in care, we can't necessarily we can't multiply our workforce all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
So that's been hard because it's never easy to say no to people, and we are always in demand here. We are not enough midwives in our community to ever meet the demand, even non-pandemic days, right? So,
well, and you had said that when we were talking yesterday that, if somebody is 4 months pregnant right now and making those phone calls, hoping to get a midwife, it's not happening for you guys, maybe in larger centers where there are more midwives, and people are encouraged to make those phone calls to see, but it certainly isn't happening in smaller communities. You said, I loved what you said, you basically need to phone us as soon as you've peed on the stick. There's that much demand for your service. Something else that I wanted to ask you about too, that you'd mentioned yesterday, you said that there's a really big concern for the mental health of moms after they have these babies because of this pandemic. Explain, because that's something that I hadn't thought of either, and I'm sure our audience would be interested to hear your perspective on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the best of times, it's always a concern, right? I mean, if you say to someone, the baby blues, most people know what you're talking about, right? And so the baby blues is very common. What's less common but much more severe and serious is postpartum depression. And that is still a significant issue. And I think, you know, one of the things that we know that helps mitigate the risks of mental health issues is having a really strong support network, having grandmas and aunties there to help you out, having somebody making meals, having somebody, you know, wash your dishes while you take a nap, things like that. And you know, especially I think in First Nations communities, we have always had a very strong kinship sort of circle. And I think right now that's really being curtailed. And my fear is just, I always think, you know, when I see a single mom with a good support network is better than a nuclear family with no extended support, just in terms of how they're going to manage and how isolated they will feel, and you know, how they're going to get help with a new baby. And so right now I do have quite a lot of concern about my clients who are going to be by themselves in their home with or without a partner. You know, one other person is not enough help when you have a new baby. They will be suffering too. And so my concern is really for the mental health of my clients, because in our community we have very few cases so far, and people are respecting social distancing and everything's shut down, and most of our pregnant families and clients are really staying home, right? And so you know, if you've been at home for 3 weeks since you were 37 weeks and you're 40 weeks and having your baby, like, you can be reasonably certain that you're not exposed to COVID at this point. But you have to keep doing that quarantine, because, you know, if your auntie was out doing groceries yesterday, you don't want to bring that into your home with your newborn. And so I'm less worried about this current crop of people having babies being exposed to coronavirus. I'm much more worried about how are they going to cope, how are they going to make it ends meet in terms of getting sleep, having healthy food. You know, like, people can do a porch drop off and they can wait you from the other side of the window, but it's no substitute for having family there holding a baby, letting you take a nap, letting you take a shower or a bath. You know, like, it's a huge endeavor having a newborn, and especially if you have pre-existing mental health issues, this can really exacerbate them. So that is, I think, very much at the forefront of my worries around, you know, having everything sort of shut down.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I want to let you go because I don't need somebody having a baby without you in your clinic. This is important, and I appreciate what you're sharing, but go do your job.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, you take care. Stay healthy.
Care. Thanks, you too.
So switching gears now, in the midst of this pandemic, the Manitoba Métis Federation, Southern and Northern Chiefs organizations have accused the Manitoba government of some dirty COVID play. They say that buried in the budget legislation is a bill that would nullify 2 lawsuits that are before the courts. Both suits are surrounding Manitoba's practice of taking a portion of the child tax money from agencies. That's that monthly baby bonus that we all know about if we have kids. The province has been doing this for a decade. Both the NDP and the Conservatives have done it. Parents might know this as baby bonus money, as I said. It's paid by the federal government to parents who have kids under age 18, usually around the 20th of each month. If your child is in care, though, that money goes to the agency. And in Manitoba, starting in 2010, the government started taking a 20% clawback of that money from agencies, effectively making kids in care subsidize that care. Indigenous child welfare agencies filed suit in 2018 to stop this practice. The lawsuits are seeking nearly $300 million in money that had been taken from these children from 2010 to 2019. The government stopped doing this, stopped taking this money in April 2019, but then they reduced funding to the agencies by that same amount. And Chiefs organizations say that's not right, and they're crying foul.
So they're clawing it back every year. They can, no matter how they guise it, look at the numbers. The numbers one thing about math, you cannot hide numbers, and you can show those numbers. They're actually clawing back every year that amount to each of us. And SCO is the biggest one. They claw back the most majorities, SCO. So when you start looking at those numbers, that's what they amount to in 10 years, $300 million lawsuit. because you look at those numbers. And now they tried them, and you heard Stephenson said we don't claw back anymore. Of course you do. You just give us less now. Of course you don't do it a traditional clawback. You used to do it. Now you do it through a block funding scenario by providing less versus the amount of child allowance money. That's all you've done, but you're still clawing back.
That Stephenson that he just referred to, that's Minister Heather Stephenson. She's Families Minister here in Manitoba. She argues that that block funding that he's talking about de-incentivizes agencies from apprehending kids because the funding formula used to be based on the number of kids that you had in care. Now, with this fixed sum, it's hoped that these agencies will focus on keeping kids at home, not taking them because there's a funding incentive to do so. But regardless of how the funding or how the money flows, the Chiefs organizations are taking issue with Bill 34 that's buried in the provincial budget that's now on hold because of COVID. If passed, it would legislate that these lawsuits be thrown out of court. Sean Carcello is one of the lawyers working on the case, and he said that the government must be scared that the suit is going to be successful if they're taking this sort of action.
There's a federal law that says this money goes to specific children. And we can name the child. Each child says, you get this money, Jimmy and Johnny and Susan. You get this money. The province is trying to use a provincial law to go over the top of a federal law and say, no, that's money. That money is really ours to use to build roads and to pay our staff and to do whatever we want to do with it. So obviously that there's a huge constitutional issue there. But here's even bigger than this, No one is above the law. No one is supposed to be above the law. And really what they're doing here is taking away the rights of these children to challenge in court these actions of the government. And let's take aside whether that it's a good case or a bad case. Obviously, we believe it's a good case, and you can probably read into the fact that they've created legislation to try to get out of it. They're worried about it too.
Yeah.
Probably a pretty good case. But to take away the legal rights of any Canadian to go to court to challenge their government, there are huge charter rights at stake here. The precedent that can be set if this is allowed, I can't imagine a more dangerous precedent that the government can act illegally and then get away with it.
As you can see, I talked to them earlier. Those, of course, would have been studio guests here pre-COVID, but because of the isolating, we don't have studio guests. So I got to talk to those gentlemen on Zoom. So what good does it do for kids that were robbed of that baby bonus money from 2010 to 2019 if the agencies are suing the government now? Well, the Chiefs say that the agencies are suing so they can get the money and then return that money to those children. As you heard the lawyer say there, they know who all the kids are that were in care during that 9-year period, and can return the money to them if that lawsuit was successful.
No different than you do with you done reconciliation when you did the residential school, when you did the same thing when you did with the 60 scoop. The actions would be the children would end up getting their money.
Okay, so this would go to that was what I wasn't clear on. I thought it was the agencies that were going to be taking this money, and then it would maybe help kids currently in care, but it does nothing for the kids who are already in the system and gone in the past decade. So this money would be divvied up to, if the lawsuits went ahead and we won, it would be divvied up to children who were in care during that time?
Yes, for sure. MMF would be doing that for sure, giving back to those children, because the agency's got to take this to court because the agency are representative of the children. That's why. Okay,
so can I get clarification from the Grand Chiefs as well? Sure. You're saying that this would be, this money, if these lawsuits went ahead, would be returned to children who were in care, whose baby bonus money this was?
Whose Head Start was robbed from them, yes.
Yeah, some of our agencies actually do invest in education savings plans, RESPs, like a lot of that funding, that's where it goes.
Well, we need to take a quick break, but still ahead, we talk to parents who are charged with kidnapping for taking their kids from a supervised CFS visit, and a mom who hasn't seen her son in 6 weeks because of the virus. Stay with us.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus and send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. Joining us now, this Winnipeg mother was a respite worker who believed the only time child welfare agencies bother a family is if they're neglecting or abusing their children. So 11 years ago, when she had her son and was feeling overwhelmed at the prospect of going home with this new life, which many of us feel, a nurse came to comfort her as she sat on the end of the bed shaking while her husband went to go get the baby car carrier. The nurse asked, "Did you want to talk to somebody?" And Mom thought she would have the helpful ear of a counselor of some sort to boost her confidence. She knew she might be prone to postpartum depression and wanted to get all the help and advice that she could. Well, she was not told that this helpful hospital lady was a child welfare worker whose job it is to find new moms to open case files on. She figured that part out when she was subjected to countless home visits after the baby was born. There was no helpfulness to these visits, just endless demands, invasive questions, and demeaning remarks that left her felt crushed, she says, and judged. The Winnipeg agency would, over the next 11 years, pop back in to assess how things were going as her son was diagnosed with autism, and last year they took the boy, saying that he has high needs and requires specialized care, saying that the mom needs to pass a parental assessment to prove that she can care for this child. He's been living in a group home in Winnipeg ever since. I talked to his mom earlier this week. Let's watch. So I want to start at what's going on most recently, and then we can kind of work backwards through your story. You were having weekly visits with your son until nearly 6 weeks ago when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Your caseworker called with a plan. Is that right? Can you share what the plan was supposed to be?
Originally, the plan put forth by my worker was that they were going to be putting Zoom video chats in place on a weekly basis was the original plan.
And did that happen?
Not really. It has now been set up, but there were many issues of delay tactics used by CFS in order to not have this happen until actually I've had now two video chats with my son.
Now, so that's 2 video chats in 6 weeks. You can't have phone conversations necessarily with your son. Your son has been diagnosed with autism, so the phone isn't his best way of communicating. Is that right?
Yeah, like they have actually tried them a couple of times over the last couple of months, and they have now gotten proof that these are not an option for my son.
You had initially, when this was all about to begin, everybody going into lockdown, you had said to your caseworker, "Here, I have an iPad for my son so we can video chat, so we can FaceTime back and forth." That seemed like, to a casual onlooker, like that would be a good idea, and great that you purchased it. It's not left to the system to buy. What was the response when you told the caseworker, "Here's a brand new iPad for my son and I to communicate," since we can't have the in-person visits?
Well, what actually happened was she actually physically pushed the iPad away because I was trying to give it to her in person, and she said that she will not take my iPad for my son ever, and that her opinion was that the group home was to use their personal funds to provide a device, even though CFS, I know, does provide group homes and foster homes with funds to provide these types of services to children.
So when in the introduction, before we started chatting here, I gave our audience a little bit of background about you and your story. I mean, I wonder, do you look back on all of this and think you were a former respite worker? You're articulate, you're smart. Do you look back and feel like, others don't stand a chance against this system? If it can happen to you, what chance would somebody with less education or able to articulate themselves or stand up for themselves, what chance do they have?
Yes, very much. This is definitely not an isolated event, and I've seen and heard of it happening to thousands of other families. And sadly, as you mentioned, many parents don't have the background or the information to understand and stand up for their rights and how to fight through all the trauma that CFS puts them through. It's making them easier prey. So again, if someone who does have the backing and the knowledge and has been considered safe enough to do respite can then be turned around at the drop of a hat and be told that they're not allowed to look after their own kids, then that puts everybody else that they could happen to anybody else.
You described this system as a monster with many heads. Share that with us. I think that it was interesting insight into what a lot of people are feeling, but you put it really, really well.
Well, CFS is like a huge beast-like monster that, in my opinion, has many heads. And so the main part is obviously CFS itself, but then each head is a different type of organization, agency, or school or whatnot that is kept in business because of the funds that they receive from CFS. But the unfortunate thing is that these funds are only provided because CFS takes so many children because their funding is based on their apprehension rate.
Well, and you know, we've heard, I've interviewed the government of Manitoba, and they've said that they've changed that, how agencies are funded. They've changed it to block funding, and that's supposed to de-incentivize the apprehensions. But now we've got the agencies that are fighting this block funding. They liked it how it was funded before. Do you find it's, I mean, when you look at the whole system, do you see an easy way for this to be fixed? You know, as somebody who's been on the outside of the system looking in, and now somebody who's in the system and looking within, what do you think could change to help? Because we got a problem in Manitoba.
Well, definitely, I agree. In my opinion, the easiest way to fix that is to take the funds that they do receive from the government, and instead of using them only after that CFS has apprehended a child, that they use these funds to prevent apprehensions and actually put in-home supports to support the families and the parents that do legitimately struggle, so that children do not end up in care, rather than, I have found out that these funds are often only available for therapy and whatnot after the apprehension, that they are actually not available at all prior to apprehension.
So, and maybe explain a little bit to our audience here about how your son, I mean, I had explained that this all kind of began in the hospital and it just snowballed from there. You had suffered depression years before having children, and somehow they accessed this information and have used it to kind of paint a picture of you. What is it like to try to come out from unpainting that picture?
Well, it's very hard, actually, because it makes it absolutely impossible for them to be willing to say, okay, this is your past, your trauma, but with me, it's been, but you've gone to therapy and you've tried medication and now you're stabilized, but we are just going to continue to say that you had depression and anxiety, and therefore you are a risk even of being unsafe towards your children, because you may slip back into that one day.
And that's for the rest of your life?
Yes, for forever.
Yeah. You'd said that shortly after your son was born, you had been offered respite care, to, quote, give you a break, and you thought, hey, why not? I wouldn't, this way I don't have to burden my friends or my family, and what a lovely service that the government offers to new moms. Looking back on that, what goes through your head?
Well, I now realized how blind that I, like many parents, was actually of CFS's tricks and games. The respite they put in was actually making parenting harder and more stressful, and often would leave my newborn son at the time actually in potentially dangerous situations put upon him by the respite workers that would come in. Some would berate me, refuse to fulfill their contracted job requirements, yell at me, trigger my PTSD, not care for my son in ways that they were supposed to. And this went on for a good 6 months of my son's life. And then the CFS respite workers would never get any repercussions or anything from this. Rather, I would find out that they've just been moved on to another family.
When they decided that they were going to swoop in to take your son last April, they came to your house to tell you that they were doing it. They were taking him from school kind of as they were visiting with you. A judge had granted this Winnipeg Child Welfare Agency a temporary order. I think it was a six-month order. It's been a year since he's been in custody. That's more than a 6-month order. Why don't you have him back?
Well, legitimately, there actually is no reason for myself to not have my son, but rather than the fact that the agency continues to state that the depression diagnosis is still problematic for them, but they're also now zeroing in on my autism diagnosis and that of my son as well, stating that in their opinion that children who have autism are unsafe being raised by their parents who may have autism themselves. So there is that piece also, so as well as being willing to speak out against CFS.
When do you go back to court? I mean, I'm trying to picture somebody saying something this asinine to a judge, and a judge not going, yeah, no, that's not how this country works. But we know that that's not necessarily what the judges do, because they're part of this industry too that keeps perpetuating it. But when do you go back to court, and what's the next step there?
Well, actually, right now I don't have any court because CFS was able to manipulate things to trick me and my lawyer into signing off with a second order against my son of 4 months. So there is no court in place. And with the COVID-19, all the legal areas have shut down. So my next step is actually I'm going to have to look into finding another lawyer or to self-advocating, which only then makes things harder. So.
And that's, I guess, we're going to have to, that'll be for you to get a court date once courts reopen.
Yes,
exactly. Who knows how long that'll be. Okay, well, I thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with our audience. I really appreciate that. And best of luck. I hope that the visits, the Zoom visits at least continue a little more regularly for you during this pandemic.
Thank you very much.
This next couple that we're going to hear from lost their toddler and infant to the system in December, and they've been fighting to get them back ever since. They say they've jumped through the hoops that have been laid out by a Manitoba CFS agency and were hopeful that the children would be returned in March. Then COVID-19 hit, and at a supervised visit, they left with their children, not wanting them to be in care during this pandemic. Our CMP officers then descended upon a home in rural Manitoba where they say they were attacked by 8 people, including the 23 and 21-year-old parents of the children. After an altercation, parents and 6 other adults were charged with assaulting police, resisting arrest, assault with a weapon, and aiding and abetting a parental abduction. But the parents say it was the police who were the aggressors, and they were only trying to protect their children during this pandemic by taking them from the foster system. I had a chance to talk with them earlier this week. Take a listen. So thank you guys both for joining us. Let's start with the decision that you guys made to take your kids from a supervised visit. What was going through your minds when you did that?
Well, we were fearing for our children's health and safety due to the COVID-19. And besides the obvious reason that they are our children, not the agencies, we thought we would just get our family together through these hard times in this pandemic. And we also knew our visits would be canceled soon due to social distancing, and well, now they are. So,
just a reminder for our audience: how old are the 2 kids?
Our youngest one is about to turn 1 April 29th, and our daughter is turning 3 this year, so she's 2 now.
So, I mean, walk us through kind of after you guys took the kids, you went to your in-laws' house with the children. What happened after that?
Well, we came to our in-laws. We took our children out of the car and we went inside. And a couple minutes after, the police showed up. Asking my parents if they had seen us, and well, I'm not exactly sure what they said, but they said they had tracked our car from OnStar and that they knew we were there.
And the police come in. I mean, it was a TAC team, basically. The police described this as a standoff. Of course, the courts, nothing that they've said against you or nothing that you say, this all has to get hashed out in court still. But let's just get to the point where the police do decide to move in. People are shot with rubber bullets. I can't remember if I heard that there was tear gas fired into the house too.
Yes. Well, we were attacked outside. My daughter and I, we were thrown down onto the ground by a police officer. And my father, he was beat up really badly in the face, and we eventually all got inside, and later on, my brother and my dad, they were shot with rubber bullets really badly, and my brother, one of his ribs was sprained, almost broken from that, and my mother and I, we were with my children in the house, and they threw tear gas through the windows, breaking almost all the windows. There was glass everywhere, and they just forcefully busted down the door and came in. We surrendered, and they had huge machine guns pointed at us, and well, they weren't exactly listening to anything we had to say, but...
I mean, you guys are among people that are facing charges. Do you think that these charges are going to impact your ability to visit the kids or have them returned when all of this is over, goes through court?
Well, we were hoping our charges would be dropped, as they are our babies. We've been in contact with the agency about our case, and honestly, at this point, we're not sure what's going to happen. We're hoping for the best.
Do you guys have regrets? I mean, I understand a lot of people. I remember when when we were all first starting to realize that this pandemic, that this could be, a massive impact on all of our lives. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of, people were toilet paper hoarding, for God's sake. There was panic. Do you look back and regret your actions that day?
No, I don't. We don't regret it at all. We got to spend 8 hours, an entire day with our children. They never could have been happier.
As opposed to 3 hours.
We got 6 hours a week, 2 visits a week, 3 hours a visit, and to have an entire 8 hours in one day and see the smiles on my baby's faces, we don't regret it.
No, they were so happy. They were so happy.
Mom, you were a child in care yourself, and you feel that that's left you with a target on your back from CFS agencies. Can you share that with our audience? Why you feel like that?
Yes, I was in care for 2 weeks. Then I was returned home with my sister. But all my other siblings, we had a big family, all my other siblings stayed in care. We're still not sure why. When my parents lost the case, the agency threatened them that if any of their children were to have children of their own, they would take them, and so far that's exactly what's been happening.
You've missed your baby's first Christmas because the children were apprehended in December. You've missed your baby's first Easter. Later this month, you're gonna miss your son's first birthday. How does this affect you guys both?
Honestly, it's hard not to cheer up most of the time. We're trying to stay strong for our kids, but emotionally, it's really wrecking us.
Dad, how are you feeling of looking at it like this?
Well, it's devastating and really sad. I believe the first year of a baby's life is the most important and should most definitely be spent with his mom and dad, especially if his mom and dad love them so much like we do. It's just really hard.
Are you guys accused of abusing or neglecting your children?
No, just accused of lack of supervision and past drug use. That was a very little short period, and that's long all over. And
the main allegation was that it was my parents.
That was the first allegation.
Case.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why they took them, because my parents had a past with the agency.
Yeah.
And there was apparently sexual abuse somewhere in there.
And was that ever proven?
No. All the allegations that were always faced against my parents, they were never proven. Nothing. The charges, my parents had charges, they were always dropped because there was nothing, and there is nothing.
Her family is really nice. They are super friendly, and they've just been accused wrongly, and they're very misunderstood people. People should just listen to them sometimes and hear their side, but it seems no one wants to or cares to.
Well, and I should say we're talking to you guys from a small community in southeastern Manitoba, and I think that there's some sort of, once somebody's been painted with a brush, rightly or wrongly, there's a reluctance for people to ever change their minds about that. Is that kind of the feeling that you guys get where you're living?
Yes.
So are you guys getting updates about how the kids are doing? Since this incident where you took them from a supervised visit, are you in contact with the caseworker or with the foster parents to find out how your kids are doing?
Yes, we are receiving short videos and pictures once a week. They always tell us that our children are doing great, but in the videos we receive, our children look sad and depressed. But our daughter always says, "I miss you, Mom," on the videos, and our son's always pointing at the camera and giggling when we send them a video too, a very short one, and yeah. So.
What's next for both of you guys? I guess you have court coming up for the criminal charges. Do you guys have court coming up for the CFS stuff?
So far, we have court coming up in May for the criminal charges, and we have no date yet on our next family court since the courts have been closed. So our next step is a PCA, and they said it all matters on what the results are for that. Whenever we do it, we're not even sure when that's supposed to happen. So.
They still haven't told us or set up a date when we're supposed to do that PCA.
That's just for our audience at home. If you don't know what a PCA is, that's a parental capacity assessment that the agency will do involving the parents to decide if they feel that these children can be returned to them. Well, I'm glad that you guys are having some at least video contact with your children. There's a lot of people that we've heard from that are not so fortunate. Some people haven't seen their kids in weeks or even talked to them. Thank you guys for taking the time out to join us and share your story with our audience.
No problem.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
We reached out to the province of Manitoba to find out what specific directives have been issued to agencies to make sure that families are staying connected during this pandemic. They said in a statement that the pandemic has created difficult situations where in-person visits must be postponed for children in care and their families. The province has sent out information to authorities and agencies outlining ways that family contact can still be maintained through phone calls, emails, or video chats when possible. Family connections are deemed an essential service, and all efforts to connect via alternate means are required. If a family feels they do not have sufficient access to their child, they should speak with an agency supervisor or the governing authority for support. That was from the province of Manitoba. Well, we have to take another break, but still ahead, a pediatrician turned politician who's been fighting for families who've been abused by the child welfare industry. Stay with us.
Who have had their kids taken away or who've got issues with CFS, so I'm regularly called.
Welcome back. I was just lamenting how lonely it is in the studio at this desk by myself because of the COVID. But Dr. John Gerard is a well-known and well-loved pediatrician turned politician here in Manitoba. He's a Liberal MLA known for helping the little guy. He's an ally for Indigenous people on a number of issues and an advocate for children and families who have been targeted and abused by the child welfare industry here. Keep in mind, Manitoba is the worst jurisdiction in Canada for seizing children from their parents and fighting to keep them in the system, and often leads with little to no grounds. 10 to 11,000 kids are in care at any given point in this province, 90% of whom are Indigenous. Before we were all self-isolating, I had the chance to have Dr. Gerard in studio for a chat about what's wrong with this system. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the mess of CFS that is in this province and a lot of other provinces too. I want to know, Dr. Gerard, how did you become involved? There's a Brandon family, of course, who's battling Machif CFS about the apprehension of their child and seemingly endless hoops that the agency expects them to go through to get their child back, and they are unwilling to go through all these hoops because they say, you know, we shouldn't have taken our child in the first place. How did you get involved advocating for this family?
I get calls from people all over the province who have had their kids taken away or who've got issues with CFS, so I'm regularly called by people like this family and others, and I do my best to work with them and to help them deal with the issues, help them find a lawyer sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, before you were a politician, you're a doctor. Pediatrician, correct?
Yep.
So I'm curious, from your perspective outside of politics, you know, when you hear these stories of these kids being taken, oftentimes from the hospital, these are newborn babies that are being taken, You know, as a doctor, how does it make you feel to hear these stories, and what's the impact, the lasting impact of these apprehensions?
When I was a doctor, I was hearing stories about how people were afraid of CFS. They were afraid of the very people who were supposed to help them. And I started saying, there's something very wrong with this, right? I mean, if CFS is there to help, people shouldn't be afraid of them. And that got me started on looking at what was happening with CFS and suggesting that we change things around so that CFS can actually help people instead of just taking kids away.
Well, and you were elected, you said, in 1999. So the province of Manitoba, for people at home who maybe don't know, because it's a national audience, so maybe they don't know, specifically in Manitoba, 1999 was kind of a pivotal year. Devolution happened after that. So the province of Manitoba said, here, First Nations and Métis organizations can have their own CFS agencies that should solve some of the problems. And we've actually seen the number of kids apprehended under this devolved model increase. I'm curious as to your thoughts. How did you think that it was going to work? And then what are your thoughts as it kind of unfolded and you saw the problem balloon? What went wrong?
Well, I think the concept of having culturally related agencies helping families is a good one. I mean, we've seen it work with Jewish Child and Family Services and others. But what happened here is that it went off the rails, and the government was not on top of what was going on. They didn't push for families to be supported. In fact, they made changes and pushed for more families to be apprehended. So we basically, under the NDP, had a doubling of the number of children in care. I mean, it was awful. I had people coming to me and say, you know, this is way off the rails. This has really gone wrong. We shouldn't be apprehending all these kids. And so I started looking more and more into this. We wrote a long report in 2013 talking about how we needed to make changes, how we needed to be much more supportive of families and have the mechanisms to support families rather than going in there and apprehending here, there, and everywhere.
You have a problem with just the grounds on which kids are being apprehended in this province. We've had Michael Champagne from Fearless 2W on here as well. They work with families who aren't doing anything wrong, but could be targeted by child welfare agencies to take kids who aren't being abused, aren't being neglected, but they could still be taken. Can you explain to our audience what is the problem? What is your problem with the lack of grounds that and accountability, I guess, for people who can come in and just snatch children from families?
There are a number of aspects which have worked to increase kids being apprehended, particularly apprehended at birth, but of course a lot later on. One of the fundamental problems has been the birth alerts, and the risk has been decided on a variety of factors, and often people are put at higher risk than if you actually talked with them and find out from their neighbors how they're doing and their friends, right?
Yeah.
So that what's then happened is that you've got agencies apprehending kids. Now, what should be happening is that families come and talk with CFS, as the Brandon family did, partway through the pregnancy. They expected, if there was any issues, that they would get some help at that point so that they could be taking the child home. What happened was there was no follow-up.
No.
There was no help from CFS during the pregnancy. This should be absolutely standard. And if a family comes to Child and Family Services, if they can't do it, they need to make sure that the family is referred to somebody else who can provide support. This is going to be, of course, even more critical with birth alerts, but in Nelson House, I was up in Nelson House visiting with Felix Walker at the Wellness Center in January. He has managed things so they virtually never have to apprehend a child at birth anymore. And they are in touch with families as soon as they know that there's a pregnancy. They have a public health nurse that's part of their operation. Public health nurse goes and visits the family, asks, how can we help you?
Right.
Look, these are the things that you have to prepare for. If there's any issues that emerge, they figure out ways to support them. This is the sort of thing that should be happening all over the province, but hasn't been.
Why?
Well, I think that it needs government leadership, right, to make sure it's happening all over the province. It also needs to make sure that the resources are provided in such a way that the CFS agency either has the resources within their own operation or is linked into another organization which can provide that support. In Nelson House, they have the advantage that it's an integrated organization. The Wellness Center includes not only CFS, it includes counseling, it includes well baby support, it includes childcare, it includes public health, and they also help with housing, so that they're able to go to a family and say, how can we help you? Right? And if there is a problem, right, with a family after a child is born, and they're made aware of this, they don't go in and say, we're going to apprehend your child. They go in and say, look, this has come to our attention. How can we help you? We've got public health nurse, we've got counseling services, we've got all these other people who can actually help you. And it doesn't
seem like there's a lack of resources within any of these agencies or child welfare authorities. Like there's tons. I've referred to this as an industry in that it's a major employer in this province and in many other provinces. So it seems like there are the people who could help. There's just an unwillingness. It's just take kids first. You create additional jobs by foster homes and other people working in group homes. Manitoba has, I think it was in 2018, was that was the Legislative Review Committee's report, and they outlined a whole bunch of things like what you've just said. Here's how you can make these changes to reduce the number of kids that we're taking into care in Manitoba.
But we need to make sure that we've got training programs for people in CFS agencies to make sure that they're really able to do the support. We need to make sure that either the partnerships or the financial resources are there with the CFS agency to be able to provide the support as the alternative to apprehending children. And that support needs to be very vigorous in some cases. We have a project at Mount Carmel Clinic, the Mothering Project, which has got a dedicated effort to helping mostly pretty troubled mothers, pregnant mothers, and helping them. And these are mothers who would probably ordinarily have their children taken away through birth alerts. And they're now, many of them are able to take their kids home. So we need projects like that. We've got some experience. We need to make sure that all the agencies have that knowledge and experience and really can work very vigorously to help support families.
But what about the people who really don't even have, they don't have obvious problems that you went to their houses? Like this Brandon family, I've been to their house. I've seen them, it's baffling to me how somebody would look and say, you can't have a child. And they're raising other children. They have kids in their house. Like it's just, how do we fix that? Because there doesn't seem to be any measure of accountability for when kids are snatched that don't need to be. There's no oversight to it, and there's no measure to say that was wrong and here's your child returned. These people have, it's been, the baby's almost a year old.
Well,
how do we fix it?
There is clearly a problem in that there's not enough accountability when mistakes are made like this, right? And that there should be more accountability in terms of CFS agencies, more ability to review things quickly. Instead of taking months and months and months and tying things up in the legal system. We need to have more legal aid lawyers who are prepared to stand up and vigorously defend families. I think that's also important.
So
I mean, people don't adequately understand the trauma to the kids and to the family when you take a child away. People don't recognize that when a mother is pregnant and having a child and she starts breastfeeding, there is a tremendous incentive to look after that child and do it well. And if we can help that mother, then we've got a positive result. If we take that child away, you blow the whole thing up.
Well, and that's, I mean, the National Inquiry into Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls had said basically that same thing. You've just created a problem by inflicting that violence on that woman. And we often see then their lives spiral. And then, and to the point where you can't necessarily even give the children back at that point because you've caused this damage that she's now living with and her life spirals. Do you think this is going to be fixed within your political career?
It sure better. Yeah, that's part of the reason that I'm staying here in the legislature.
Yeah. Well, you've been fighting the fight for 20 years, and I thank you for taking time out of your day to come and chat with us about this very important issue that seems to be, it's not just a Manitoba problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
If only people would listen to him, hey? Well, that's all the time that we have for your show today. Thanks to Amaya Carbonneau and the parents who shared their stories with us, and to Dr. John Gerard for all of the work that he's done in the area of child welfare. And thanks to you, our viewers who tune in. We hope you're all healthy and weathering these tough times. I'm Melissa Ridgen. We'll see you back here next week. Take care.